لو سمحت ما تنساش تشترك في القناة ولايك للفيديو وشير علشان تشجعني اقدم لك معرفة اكتر ليك ولغيرك من المشاهدين. شكرا.
Well, having researched this now full time for virtually 30 years, and I've traveled to some 60 odd countries researching it, the key thing that people need to understand, I think, is that nothing can be seen in isolation. Everything needs context. So if you look at a situation, say the horrific bombing of Libya, say the civil war in Syria, say the current demonization of Iran, you cannot see that in isolation if you want to see what's happening. Because if you see things in isolation, you're seeing pixels, you're not seeing pictures. And so when you look at things in isolation, they look a certain way, but connect them together and they look very different. So if we take the current situation in the Middle East and what's happened in the last few years, we've seen different presidents, Bush, so-called Republican, Obama, so-called Democrat, now Trump, so-called Republican. We've seen different prime ministers in Britain. We've seen Tony Blair, supposedly a Labour Party of the left. We've had David Cameron, supposedly Conservative Party of the right. And now we have Theresa May, again, Conservative Party supposedly of the right. And what we see in the news every day and ongoing is politicians coming and going. They're here today, gone tomorrow people. But to understand what's happening, we have to look at those people that are always there. No matter what nature of a president, what nature of a prime minister, there is a force that's always there. And they are pulling the strings. And this is why, in relation to the Middle East, no matter what the political persuasion of the president or the British prime minister, the same blatant agenda of regime change and control in the Middle East and divide and rule has gone on incessantly. So if we just quickly go through this, if you go back to September of the year 2000, there was a group in America known as neocons or neoconservatives. These are far-right extremists with enormous connections, fundamental connections to Israel. And they created a group in the late 1990s called the Project for the New American Century. Now, the two people that created it were Robert Kagan and William Kristol, who are basically agents of Israel in America. And other people involved in that organization were about to become very famous in the Bush administration. Donald Rumsfeld, who would be Secretary of Defense, Paul Wolfowitz, who would be his Deputy Secretary of Defense, Dov Zakheim, who would control the whole Pentagon budget as the comptroller. And so it went on. Dick Cheney, who would become Vice President of the United States, in fact, under Boy George Bush, in reality, the de facto president. And in September 2000, this group of neocons produced a document which called for America to fight multiple theater wars, as it put it, to regime change in a series of countries in the Middle East. Iraq, they named them, Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Libya, North Korea, further away, leading eventually to what they talked about regime change in China. Well, that will be nice. That'll be interesting to see that come about and how it does. And so they said in this document that for this series of regime changes to be justified, what they called this process of transformation to be justified to the American people, what they needed was a new Pearl Harbor. A few months after this group of people, and the names that I've mentioned, came to power with Bush in early 2001, when he became president, 9 months after they came to power, and a year to the month after that document was produced, America rather, had what George Bush called at the time the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. And as a result of that, of course, I'm talking about 9/11, the official story of which is a joke. As a result of that, they started to justify picking off the countries on the list. After Afghanistan, of course, they lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to justify that. And that started a series of ongoing catastrophes in the Middle East that has turned that region asunder. They then, the lies about weapons of mass destruction were told by George Bush and Tony Blair. They were then replaced by Obama and David Cameron in Britain, but the list went on being ticked off. Now they justified protecting the people of Libya from attacks by their own government, protecting them from violence by mass bombing them from the sky. And of course, what they did then was remove Gaddafi, and they've turned Libya into an absolute catastrophe. If you do the research, and it's all in my books and other people have researched it too, you'll see that these same forces were behind the triggering of the so-called civil war in Syria, because after Libya, they were now targeting Assad in Syria, who was on the list. And this, of course, as a spanner in the works has been thrown in there by the Russians. And then you move on to present time, and you've got this Donald Trump, who claims to be a man who's different, who's going to drain the swamp, who's going to stop, as he said in the election campaign, America militarily intervening in other countries' affairs. And look at him. He's targeting Iran, which is on the list. He's of course, whipped it up with North Korea, which is on the list. And here's a very, very topical point. He has just now appointed a man called John Bolton as his national security advisor. And John Bolton was not only one of those neoconservatives that produced that document in September 2000. John Bolton is one of the most extreme of extremists, a hawk of hawks, who's never seen a country he didn't want to bomb. So you can see, as these here today, gone tomorrow politicians come and go in the West, the same agenda is unfolding. Why? Because they're just front men and front women for the real force, which is hidden in the background. And that's the one I've been exposing all these years and decades.
Well, Mr. Ike, why do you think in the list it focused on mainly Middle Eastern countries?
Well, there was a guy called Zbigniew Brzezinski, and he died last year at quite an age. And he was Jimmy Carter, the President Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. And if you watch the record of Brzezinski, particularly what he's written in his books over the years, he's telling you in what he says in his books is his opinion of what should happen. He's actually telling you what's going to happen, what the plan is, although he doesn't put it in those terms. And what Brzezinski said in a book in the late 1990s was that to control the world, you had to control Eurasia, this vast landmass from Europe across to China and from Russia in the north down into the Middle East. So if you look at the countries that have been targeted in the Middle East and are being demonized, like Iran, they are in Eurasia. Then you look at the coup, because it was an American coup orchestrated by people like the financier George Soros that has a big network of organizations called the Open Society Network, which specializes in overthrowing regimes under the cover of a people's revolution. This is what Syria is all about, for instance. And so Ukraine was an American coup, replacing a Russian sympathizing president with Poroshenko, who is just a puppet of the United States. And by the way, keeping the theme going, that coup was orchestrated by a lady called Victoria Nuland, who was the representative in the State Department for Eurasian Affairs. And Victoria Nuland is the wife of Robert Kagan, one of the co-founders of the Project for the New American Century. Once you get into this, it's a very small world. Where is Ukraine? It's in Eurasia. Look at the incessant and extraordinarily blatant demonization of Russia over recent times, where whatever happens in the world, it's Russia's fault. Don't produce any evidence, just keep saying it and people will believe it. What is Russia? It is a vast, vast country within the landmass of Eurasia. And targeting North Korea is not only in Eurasia, it's the gateway to China, which is one of the other major countries with Russia that is in the gun sights of this psychopathic regime, or hidden hand, better term than regime. And so you can see what Brzezinski was calling for, in other words, articulating what the plan was by telling you it was his opinion, unfolding all the time. And they use different excuses, sometimes not that different. So in Iraq, we must invade because of weapons of mass destruction that actually don't exist. Libya, Gaddafi's killing his own people. Syria, Assad's killing his own people. It worked there in Libya. Let's try it again. Then it's Iran. Developing a nuclear weapon and arming terrorists in the Middle East, while ignoring, of course, all the time the elephant in the living room in the Middle East, which is countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, etc., and Bahrain, who are terrorist states, vassals of the West, which is why Saudi Arabia is allowed, with British and American weapons, by the way, to bomb the innocent in Yemen. And no one in the West, in terms of government and media, says next to anything about it. In Bahrain, you've got the fake royal family there imposing its will on the people that are challenging its power in an extraordinarily violent and fascistic way. But where is the condemnation there of Bahrain? No condemnation there, no condemnation of Saudi Arabia. Why? Because they're on the same team as the West, and you don't criticize people on the same team. Instead, you target the people on your list, and that's why Saudi Arabia can do its horrors, but we're told Iran is the villain that must be stopped.
It's very strange, because if you look at Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, they are pretty much doing everything that ISIS had done, and more. They behead more people than ISIS had behead. And I wanted to get your thoughts on ISIS. Are they a CIA operation?
Well, again, if you connect the dots, and again, we can go back to Brzezinski, because some years after Brzezinski ceased to be national security advisor in the United States, the position soon to be held by John Bolton, he did an interview with a Paris French media outlet. And he said that when he was National Security Advisor to Carter, they set out to entice and manipulate the Soviet Union into invading Afghanistan. Brzezinski said quite openly the plan was to give the Soviet Union their Vietnam. About 1 million Afghans died as a result, but who cares to these people? They're psychopaths. And so the way they did it, and this is from Brzezinski's own words, by the way, they funded, armed, and trained so-called freedom fighters who became known as the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to start attacking the Soviet satellite government in Kabul. And as a result of that, of course, we had the Soviet invasion to protect the Kabul satellite government, and that created these years of catastrophic war in Afghanistan. The Taliban emerged out of this, and then the Mujahideens, which is we're talking about basically the same force morphing with different names, morphed, or elements of it morphed into what were called Al-Qaeda. Now, Robin Cook, who was a foreign secretary in Britain, and died shortly after he said this, funnily enough, went public after Al-Qaeda emerged and said that actually Al-Qaeda means the base or the database because they are made up, he said, of names on the CIA database of Mujahideen fighters that were put together to entice and fight the Soviets. And this next incarnation of this same force morphed out of Al-Qaeda into a series of names, the most dominant of which has been ISIS. And when this started, when this so-called civil war started in Syria, and of course it was called the Arab Spring, it was going to liberate the Arab populations of the Middle East from tyranny. Well, that worked, didn't it? Look at what's come out of it, because the Arab Spring was always a hoax, a Western created hoax to start this conflict and civil war in the Middle East, which could be used to regime change the governments they wanted to remove so they could put ones that suited them in power. So if you look at it, after this sudden and massive expansion of ISIS, where they were using sophisticated weapons, because they were armed and trained by the United States through various other countries, satellite countries in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, etc., etc. They expanded very rapidly in Iraq and Syria. And then the Americans went in, another justification to get the American military in the Middle East. And they used this extraordinary potential firepower that the United States have. I mean, if you look at what they spend on the military, it's bigger than the next 8 countries combined, including China and Russia.
لو سمحت ما تنساش تشترك في القناة ولايك للفيديو وشير علشان تشجعني أقدم لك معرفة أكتر ليك ولغيرك من المشاهدين. شكرا.
And the idea was that this proxy army called ISIS was going to remove Assad, and he would have done. It was very close, and that's when Assad and Russia came together, because I think Putin could see where this was going. And with the invitation from Assad for the Russian Air Force to come in, the game was changed. And we've seen now the spanner thrown in the works. And so, yes, these proxy armies are Western fronts. But how does it work? All these groups, whether it's a secret society or whether it's ISIS, whatever it is, are constructed as fiercely compartmentalized pyramids. And each level of the pyramid is compartmentalized, as they say in the intelligence community, from the other levels. In other words, isolated in terms of knowledge. The people at the top of the pyramid, the very few, know what the game is. They know who's really behind ISIS and such things, Al-Qaeda. But as you come down the pyramid, you're meeting more and more people as the pyramid gets wider. But as you come down, those people know less and less and less and less about what the organization's really about. So by the time you get to the bottom of the pyramid, you have if you like, the rank and file ISIS fighters and fanatics genuinely believing that they're fighting some jihad on behalf of their religious belief system. A religious belief system in terms of ISIS, by the way, that came out of Saudi Arabia, Wahhabism. That's why if you look at what our ISIS has operated and what it does in terms of beheadings, its beliefs, everything, and you look at Saudi Arabia, you're looking at the same thing. Why? Because Saudi Arabia was a major architect on behalf of the West of ISIS. And so by the time you get, like I say, to the bottom of these pyramids of these groups, they genuinely believe they're fighting for what they're told they're fighting for. But actually, if you go to the top of the pyramid, way beyond their level of awareness, the very same people they think they're fighting are running their organization and dictating its funding, its training, and its direction. And this is the great hoax that's been played on the Middle East. And you know, it's easy to blame the West. And my goodness me, we should, because what the West has done in the Middle East, not just now, but over generations, is an absolute horrific disgrace, not least the British Empire. But you know, you can only be manipulated if you allow yourselves to be. You can only be divided and ruled if you allow yourselves to be. And while there are groups within the Islamic Muslim world that seek to impose their will on others and will do so by force if necessary, then others are going to resist that imposition, and you're going to have inter-Islamic, inter-Muslim conflicts. Whose benefit does that serve? It serves the West. If people in Libya came together and said, hold on a minute, you know, we've all got strings attached if you look at it, and if you look up to where the strings are going, they're all held by the same hand. If we stop fighting with ourselves, we stop exploiting each other, like with migrant traffickings and criminal gangs. If we actually come together in some kind of peace and mutual respect, our ability to be divided and ruled by this Western hidden hand cabal absolutely disappears compared with what it is now. But while you've got different groups of different cultures or subcultures and different belief systems within the same religion, who instead of saying, well, okay, I believe something different to you, but that's fair enough. I'll live my life with my beliefs, and I respect you to live your life with your beliefs, and we'll all get on fine at respecting each other's right to be different. How do you divide and rule that? You can't. What you want is the target population at war with itself, which is what they've done in the Middle East, so that you can control all sides, because while they're fighting each other, you're doing what you want, unchallenged and unmolested. And what is happening in the Middle East in terms of this psychological warfare on the people, because that's what it is, and this divide and rule conflict of people being played off against each other, that is happening globally. That's what's happening globally. Different parts of global society are being played off against each other. Men are being played off against women. Black are being played off against white. Transgender is being played off against feminists now, as the divide and rule fault lines get more and more, subdivided. And so we're looking at the same process all over the world, wherever you look, of having a target population, turning it against itself by creating these fault lines of divide and rule, and by that, through that, controlling that target population. That's what's happened in the Middle East. And it's in our hands globally, and it's in the hands of the people of the Middle East to stop this happening, but not if people go on fighting among themselves, because that's exactly what this hidden hand wants.
You know, after the Iraqi war and the Iraqi invasion, we had something strange that was happening in the Middle East, and after also the Arab Spring, as they called it, and that is that people, after the first election in Iraq, and after they found out that the new leaders were almost more oppressive than Saddam and the old leaders, and especially amongst the youth, there begun to be this disillusion movement, where they became disillusioned with the scholars, the religious scholars, and all over the Middle East they're starting to blame the religious scholars for spitting out a lot of the poisons that have to do with dividing the people and controlling the people over this past period. And I wanted to get your thoughts especially on that. Those scholars and the religious institutions that are really pushing this whole agenda of Sunni versus Shia and this big conflict.
Well, Egypt's a wonderful example of what you've just described, because I remember I was speaking in Ukraine before the Poroshenko coup. And the night of the talk, I went back to my hotel room and I put the television on, put Al Jazeera on actually. And there was the big celebration live of the Arab Spring Revolution in Egypt, which removed the target leader that they thought was the problem. And the voiceovers, when you flick through the channels and you went to the English voiceovers, here were all the Western commentators and the Western journalists. Oh, isn't this wonderful? Isn't this wonderful? The people of Egypt are free. And I remember sitting there shaking my head, because that was never the idea of the Arab Spring. It was just a means of creating divide and rule conflict in the Middle East to target these regime leaders they wanted to remove, like Assad and Gaddafi, etc., etc. And what has happened? We now have the military, Sisi running Egypt. It's a hoax. And, you know, what I would say to not just people in the Middle East, but actually seriously to people in the Middle East, seriously to the young people in the Middle East, but also to everybody, everyone on planet Earth. Think for yourself. Don't let these people, whether they are journalists, whether they are religious leaders, whether they are politicians, don't let them tell you what to think. I'll tell you a story, a quick story. I've only been to Israel once. That was about 1993. They wouldn't let me in now, or if they did, they wouldn't let me out. I went there because I just wanted to see it. I wanted to see Jerusalem and that land. I'm glad I went. I learned a lot. But I was standing next to the great mosque in Jerusalem, and I was watching some little Muslim boys playing football. And of course, the old city of Jerusalem is broken up into 4 quarters. What is it? The Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Jewish quarter, the Armenian quarter, I think it is. And I watched these little boys playing football, Muslim boys playing football, and I thought, if those boys had been born in the Jewish quarter or the Christian quarter, they would now, by that age, have a very different view of themselves, of religion, of life, of reality, than they do as they were kicking that football about. And the same with the Jewish boys in the Jewish quarter. If they'd have been born in the Muslim quarter, they would now have a very different view of everything in the same way. Same with the Christians. So this might be controversial in the Middle East. I don't really care. It's about time we started calling out these things. Otherwise, this is going to go on. I would ask people, ask yourself why you believe what you believe about yourself, about your religion, about your beliefs, everything. And ask yourself this. If I was born into another culture or another religious situation, would I now think the same as I do now, even though I was born in that religious situation? Almost certainly you would not. Look at people that become, who are born into Jewish families, who are born into Christian families, who are born into Islamic families, who are born into Hindu families. What do the children invariably become? They become followers of Judaism. They become followers of Islam. They become followers of Hinduism. They become followers of Christianity. Now, is that some extraordinary statistical astonishing coincidence? Well, no. They become that because that's all they've ever heard. And not only that, in many religious cultures, not only are children and young people as they grow older influenced in their perceptions and their beliefs and their perceptions of self and reality by the information they constantly hear at the exclusion of other information. It's often policed in a tyrannical way. I'm not saying everybody, I'm saying at the extreme level, where woe betide you, little child, if you don't accept what we're telling you to believe. And so, see, people talk about freedom, but what is freedom? Freedom is choice and making choices. The fewer choices you can make, the less freedom you have. It's cause and effect. You look at the Palestinians under the horrific tyranny of the Netanyahu regime in Israel. They are not free. Why are they not free? Because they have no choices. And their choices are being taken away all the time as the tyranny imposes itself more and more. So freedom is not just freedom to pursue and practice your religion, though I'm all for that. Real freedom is actually the right and the choice to question that religion and believe something else if you feel that that's what you believe is justified.
لو سمحت ما تنساش تشترك في القناة ولايك للفيديو وشير علشان تشجعني أقدم لك معرفة أكتر ليك ولغيرك من المشاهدين. شكرا.
We can only be free, all of us, when we allow other people to be free, including our own children. You know, freedom of speech only exists if everyone has the freedom to speak their truth and give their opinion. If anything censors that says you cannot say that, you cannot believe that, then freedom of speech for everyone is dead. Because everyone else's so-called freedom of speech is not freedom of speech anymore. It's freedom to conform with what is said by an authority to be acceptable to say and believe. So when I talk about freedom, I'm talking about freedom in its widest possible sense. And that includes people born into a Muslim situation, a Jewish situation, a Christian situation, a Hindu situation, having the freedom, if they believe that is right, not to practice that religion or not to practice any religion if that's what they feel. And then the religions themselves, ironically, will be stronger because people will be practicing that religion out of choice of doing that instead of imposition programming and the insistence of the community as a whole that that's what you're going to do or else. And I see tyrannies all over the world. Tyrannies take many and various forms, and it's just a matter of extreme. And ironically, if people in the Middle East did not so fiercely insist on imposing on others not just their religion in general, but their faction of that religion, then we would have a situation where the ability of this hidden hand to divide and rule and create this conflict that allows them to be controlled would be no more. So I would say this, I'm looking at it as an observer. When you look at religions, there is a process where the religion is created and then it starts subdividing. So you had Christianity, and then you had Catholicism and Protestant Christianity, and now you've got endless factions of Christianity who basically believe the same thing, but, well, no, my faction, with all my little detail, is different to yours, very small detail mostly, is better than yours. Oh, so let's have a fight. And then you look at the Islamic religion, which is then subdivided into Sunni and Shia. And I've said in my books, way back, decades ago, before all this started in the Middle East, they're going to use the divisions between Shia and Sunni to divide and rule the Middle East. And that's exactly what they've done. They're targeting Iran, of course, the great Shia center in the Middle East, and of course the great Sunni center is in terms of control is Saudi Arabia. So look at what's happening now. You've got Saudi Arabia with this deeply psychopathic crown prince, Prince Mohammed bin Salman. I mean, when Israel and America say jump, bin Salman breaks the Olympic high jump record. He is completely controlled by those two countries. That's why you're seeing him getting closer and closer to Israel. That's why we've seen this trip to America recently that he made. So you've got Saudi Arabia, the center of the Sunni world, being played off now against Iran, which is the center of the Shia world. And although we're talking about, it's Iran and it's this and it's that, and it's Saudi Arabia, it's this and it's that, break it down. They are playing Sunni against Shia. Now, if the Sunni and the Shia, like the Protestants and the Catholics, said, hold on a minute, what we believe is so close. Why don't we just shake hands and say, look, I have a different view of the way things have evolved and the progress of the hierarchy, if you like, of Islam. But hey, we're so close in what we believe. Let's just shake hands, put down the fault lines of divide and rule, stop trying to impose each other on each other, and say, look, I'm going to respect your right to have your view of Islam. You respect my right to have my view of Islam. Shh, fault lines gone. And you know who will be the most devastated? Your John Boltons, your Mad Dog Mattises, the current head of the American military, the neocons, the William Crystals, the Robert Kagans, and all these people. They would be devastated because it's these fault lines they're playing like a stringed instrument. And it needs to stop, because if it doesn't stop, this is going to go on. And you've seen nothing yet unless the Middle East comes together and stops fighting among itself and realize that are actually all being manipulated by the same force. And it's not just the America force. It's not just the British force. That's what you see. It's this hidden hand behind that you never see, that it's really coming from.
Mr. Ike, I want to ask you about a particular Arab leader whom he stands out. I mean, they're all puppets, right? But one of them stands out more than the rest of them. And recently on the news and in the Middle East, they've been propping him up a little bit as kind of a savior. And that's King Abdullah of Jordan.
Well, when I look at him and I look at Jordan, I do see another vassal state. And, you know, it borders Israel, and Israel does not take prisoners, right? Israel is run by a psychopath. We should say this about Israel. You know, people talk about Zionism, but there are two Zionisms. And the most extreme of them is called revisionist Zionism, which was basically created by a man called Jabotinsky. I think he died in 1940. And revisionist Zionism believes that violence is a justified means of achieving their end. And their end in terms of, for instance, Palestinians is to drive them all out. That's why all these settlements are going ahead now at an ever-increasing rate since the Israeli puppet Trump came to power and just put his hands up and said, basically, do what you like. Well, one of the close associates who actually worked with him of Jabotinsky that created this violent, extreme revisionist Zionism was the father of Benjamin Netanyahu. So what you have is extreme revisionist Zionism in control of Israel under Netanyahu. It's beyond psychopathic. It's beyond merciless. If you're in Jordan, Abdullah, and you're seeing that over the border, and you see what they've done in Gaza, you see what they've done in Lebanon, you see, if you've got any sense at all, that they're driving American foreign policy in the Middle East and that they want a war with Iran, then you're probably not going to rock the boat too much. Because if you become a rebel to that agenda, then there's going to be trouble for you. And so I do understand why he is not massively outspoken in terms of challenging what's been happening in the Middle East all these years. Of course, America too would have serious trouble for Jordan if it started rocking the boat. And you see, this is the big problem they have with Iran. It's that is not prepared to bend the knee. It's not prepared to just accept this. That's why they have a problem with Lebanon. A lot of people there are just not prepared to bend the knee and accept the yoke of control and tyranny. And of course, Lebanon was on this list for regime change in September 2000. And as I said in my new book, Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told, watch for Lebanon being targeted, as well as watching for Iran. And, you know, you look at these people like this crown prince in Saudi Arabia, you look at the so-called royal family in the United Arab Emirates and these other countries that are vassals of the United States. They dare not step out of line. Otherwise, they know there'll be trouble. In terms of you have noticed what happened in Libya, have you? And Syria and Iraq? Oh yes, sir. And that's how it works. It's a tyranny that controls so much through sheer intimidation and threats. And that's why, they want to crush anyone that will stand up to that intimidation. Iran in the Middle East, Russia further north, China, North Korea. And it's a simple process they use, and they've used it over and over again. And my God, have they used that in the Middle East? Demonize and destroy. Demonize and destroy. And you know where the next conflict is likely to be, or where they want it to be, by a simple question. Who are they demonizing now? Because whoever they're demonizing now, they'll want to destroy tomorrow. And so you went, there's a well-known picture on the internet that you can see. You went from a picture of John Kerry, Obama's Secretary of State, having dinner with President Assad and his wife, and Kerry and his wife, and Kerry being quoted as, basically, we get on with him, we get on together, and, I like Assad, to Kerry very soon afterwards standing at microphones saying Assad is a demon, he must be removed. Because these people at the microphones are puppets of those who you never see. And it was Bush, it was Obama, it's Trump. Be someone else next, but the same agenda will unfold. Unless we stop it, which we can.
How would you recommend going about stopping it?
Well, overwhelmingly, what I've